What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolve video. Alright soldiers, in this video we're going to be moving along with the Inverse Academy series, and we're still going to be talking about set 11 decks. And in this version of set 11 we are going to be talking about Havencraft. And alright soldiers, before we get into this Havencraft breakdown, I want to thank everybody for voting in that poll that I'd put up last week, figuring out which Dragoncraft deck we're going to be talking about in the next video. And of course, if you aren't paying attention to the post and whatnot, that's okay. Just want to let everyone know that Resplendent Phoenix is the one that won. I'll throw it up right here. Thank you so much for voting, and we will make sure we will do that in the next video. But of course, without further ado, let's go ahead and roll this intro. And probably to no surprise to anyone, we're going to be talking about Wasteland Haven here, since there isn't really any other archetypes that came out in set 11 for Havencraft. But Wasteland Havencraft is actually a pretty fun deck that I think a lot of you soldiers should really look at if you haven't already. Alright, so I don't want to speed things along too much, but of course I wanted to go ahead and start talking about the pros and cons for the deck, just in case you soldiers might be, still on the fence of what you might be looking towards when playing this deck. Alright, so on the pro side we have aggro, storm, burn, versatility, and solid search. Now while on the con side we have small bodies, late game finishers, and expensive plays. Alright, so starting off with the first pro, this is kind of like a lower to the ground deck, so we are going to be playing very aggressive. And of course I'll just talk about the next 2 points too, just because they all go in tandem with each other. So of course we're going to be playing lower to the ground, so our followers that we are going to be playing low to the ground are going to have storm, so we'll be able to immediately swing the face. And then some other followers might not have storm, but they might have burn damage attached to them. Alright, and then next up we have versatility, of course. So in the terms of versatility that I mean for the deck is that we can kind of like side in cards where we're like, hey, I don't like this aspect of this deck. Well, Haven does have a lot of options to really choose from, so you're able to take out a card that you might not really need that's not archetypal heavy, and then you're able to kind of slide that in and make it work in this deck. Alright, and then we have solid search. So from the last set that we experienced in Havencraft, we were able to look at top X, just kind of peek into our future. Well, some of those cards we can actually bring into this set for set 11. And then our legendary is actually going to let us look at top 4, so we can put, X amount of cards into different areas. And then moving on into the con side, so of course if we're going to be playing very aggressive in the early turns, we're going to have small bodies, so we're really going to have to exchange those big stat numbers for the small bodies that are able to swing that turn that they're played. Alright, and of course, as we prolong the game, and if we're not being as aggressive as we can and we can't finish off our opponent in a certain time frame, then we're going to be lacking in terms of the later game cards that our opponents might be playing. Now, that doesn't mean we aren't going to be able to match their freak at any time, but we don't have a late game finisher that really closes out the game for us in this deck. And I know moving on to the next point, you soldiers might have a question over your head saying, well, if we don't really have any late game finishers, what exactly are our expensive plays in the deck? So when we do go for a legendary, there are going to be things that we can do in terms of like recovering play points, and then also playing a card that we did put into the EX area. And then there's another card that we might not have access to that our opponent can, if they have the option to, interact with. But there's a card that's going to be in our EX area that we don't really have control over, however many play points it is, so we might not be able to have access to that second card that we might play. Alright, so enough walking on eggshells, let's go ahead and figure what our legendary is for the deck. Alright, so we have Selena Sugarkiss Assassin, so she's a 4-cost 2/2. She has Storm, but when she comes into play, you look at the top 4 cards of your deck. From among them, you may put up to 1 Wasteland card and up to 1 follower that costs 2 or less into your EX area, put the rest of the bottom of your deck in any order, and then she has a strike ability, so when she swings, you recover 2 play points. Alright, so this is the card that I'm saying, so being able to spend 4 to being able to look at the top 4 for any Wasteland card that you want, and 1 follower that costs 2 or less, which is going to be very vital, because when you do swing with this card, you get those 2 play points back, so you essentially get 2 cards in 1 turn. Alright, so if you are very familiar with how Wasteland does work, we are going to need mounts in this deck. So the cool thing about the mounts is that we can throw them on the Sugar Kiss Assassin, so you can buff her up and make her a 3/3, or make her a 3/2, anything like that. Just buffing her up in the attack is just very important because she's just going to have Storm, and then swinging in for that big Storm damage in one turn is just very important. So of course we're going to look at the neutral cards that are just going to be the Quixotic Adventurer and the Vagabond Lizard, which also puts the Dutiful Steed token into our EX area, while Vagabond Lizard puts the Bullet Bike into the field or EX area, and then when it dies you put the Dutiful Steed into your EX area. But however, we also do have Shady Priest in this deck, which is a 1-cost 2/1. When he comes into play, we put a Dutiful Steed token into our EX area, and whenever a mount card we control leaves the field, we can spend 3 play points to select enemy fall on the field and banish it. Now this is going to be very helpful in the deck just because on Quixotic Adventurer we're just going to spend the 1 to go ahead and get the Dutiful Steed into our EX area. We can also go for Shady Priest in the later turns, especially, the turns over 4+, which we can spend 1, get the Dutiful Steed, and then if we already have like a Dutiful Steed or maybe a Bullet Bike from Vagabond Lizard, we can spend that extra 3 points to just go ahead and just hard remove a follower. Alright, so just like we were talking about, we're only going to be focusing the Dutiful Steed and the Bullet Bikes in this deck. Alright, so let's talk some aggression. Alright, so looking at Revolver Eagle here, so it's a 2-cost 2/1. It also has Storm, but when it comes into play, we put a Bullet Bike token into our EX area. We can also activate for 6 extra play points to give this follower +4/+4. Alright, so this was kind of like the versatility I was talking about in the deck. So especially on turn 2, if you already have like a mount on the field, you can go ahead and buff this up, activating, getting rid of that amulet. Make this Revolver Eagle bigger if you want to. But however, in the later parts of the game, of course we don't have the late game finishers with the big, boss body. If we do manage to get to those 8 play points, we can turn this into a 6/5, which is pretty good in terms of storm damage. Alrighty, next up we have Pure Metamorphosis, which is a 1-cost spell card. We can select a card on the field and destroy it, and then we can summon a Holy Falcon token. Alright, so initially we want to make sure we get rid of cards that have last words because that still procs their last words. They're not being bounced, they're not being bottom decked, they're being destroyed. So those last words are going to pop off, and then when we get those last words effects, we're also going to get a Holy Falcon token, which is going to be a 2/2 with Storm. Alright, and then next up we have Vengeful Sniper, so it's a 3-cost 3/3, it has Ward, and then when it comes into play, if we have at least 2 amulets on our field or in our EX area, we can deal 2 damage each enemy leader. Alright, so on paper it doesn't seem like Vengeful Sniper is that too much of a good of a card in terms of like aggression, but I think playing this on turn 3 and then having a 3/3 that your opponent does have to answer, and of course it seems like the fanfare is going to be something that will most likely come up in this deck. Since we have cards like Revolver Eagle that just puts a Bullet Bike token to our EX area if we still want to swing for some damage that turn, or the Vagabond Lizard or the Quixotic Adventurer on turns 1 and 2 if you want to go ahead and set up for the Vengeful Sniper the very next turn. Alright, and lastly we have Stalwart Featherfolk. So this card came out in set 10, it was quite some time ago, so this is still played in the Storm Ward deck. And having this as a 1-cost 2/2, which if you have the extra 2 play points on turn 3 if you want to go ahead and turn this into a 3/3 with Storm is pretty good as well. Alright, so let's talk about some removal for the deck. Alright, so looking at our new card, so we have Haven Fire, so it's a 2-cost spell. So this card costs 1 less to play if there's a Selena Sugar Kiss Assassin on our field. So we can select enemy fall on the field and deal 4 damage, and if there's a Wasteland card in our EX area, we can deal 1 damage to its leader. Alright, so we absolutely love it when we can spend 2 and then deal 4, and mind you, this is realistically a spend 1 because when we go for our Sugar Kiss Assassin, we're able to look at the top 4, we can get any 2-cost card and then any Wasteland card that we want. So you can choose either one of the 2 that we would want. So this could be one of the cards that we can get, and then it'll be a 1-cost card. While we do get to swing for the Storm damage and recover 2 play points, we can use one of those points and go into Haven Fire. And then of course with Vengeful Sniper, if we do get the Evo, still having that ward and then turning into a 4/4, but this on-evolve ability is just amazing because this is just Cudgel in set 11, so we can select the enemy follower with 3 defense or less on the field and banish it. So of course there are those times when we are playing against certain decks and we're not able to remove a follower off the field, so having this effect of, you at least did a little bit of damage, you can now just banish it. So I really like it when cards have that. Alright, and then next up we have Vengeful Radiance, which is a 2-cost quick spell, and of course this card can be played during our turn, but just being able to select 2 enemy followers in the field and dealing it 4 damage divided between them is very good in the early game, so it can take care of 2 followers. Alright, and lastly I wanted to include Demon's Epitaph because in the Pure Metamorphosis we're able to swing face or swing for a follower and make sure we remove that follower. Sometimes this card manages to stay alive, so Being able to use pure metamorphosis on this card to deal 2 damage to the enemy leader while spawning out a Holy Falcon token can threaten 4 damage in one turn. So I did want to give these cards the honorable mentions when having removal for the deck, just because they are still pretty good, I think, in my opinion. They just aren't ran in every build. Alright, so talking about Eidolon of Madness here, so I absolutely love this card. So it's not going to be every time that we play Eidolon of Madness when we're going to have at least 3 amulets on the field, but spending this for 2 and then spending it for the extra 2 if you have the play points, of course, to go ahead and hard remove a follower off the field, stopping its last words from happening since you get to banish it. And then this is going to be an amulet that your opponent can't really interact with, and even if they do interact with it, they're going to be taking 3 to face. So when we are ready to take care of this card using pure metamorphosis, of course, we throw this into the cemetery, they take 3, and then we have a 2/2 storm, which is going to threat a total of 5 damage. And of course we have Aquoit's Light, which is just a staple in most Havencraft decks. Just being able to banish something in quick timing while also healing too is just huge. Alright, so let's talk about some late game. Alright, so we have Anvelt Judgment's Cannon, so it's a 6 cost 4/5. You can evolve it for 1, it has ward, but when it comes into play, we select put 2 enemy followers on the field and deal them 3 damage. And if there's a Wasteland card in our EX area, we can deal 2 damage to each enemy leader. While looking at the evolve side, so we turn this to a 5/6, he still has ward, but on evolve, we select up to 2 enemy followers in the field and deal it through damage, and if there's a Wasteland card in our EX area, we can deal 2 damage to each enemy leader. Alright, so a pretty good late game card, honestly. So you can take care of 2 followers with a total of 6, or if, you know, there are a whole bunch of small followers that are 3/3s, you know, you can take care of like a total of 4 of them, but, you know, that's not going to be super often. While also having the effect of dealing a total of 4 to the enemy face, while having a big giant ward on the field that we don't really have to engage if our opponent isn't, you know, doing anything too crazy. But of course, if they're playing and we're on the back end, we have a ward to really fall back on. And this last card, some of you soldiers might honestly disagree with, but I think Godsworn Alexiel is just a good late game card for this deck just because our mounts are amulets. And if we're not able to finish off our opponent just because, you know, we're playing Quixotic Adventurer, what's the point of throwing up my Dutiful Steed token if I know my 3/2 is going to get dealt with? Or I'm just putting up all these stats for these Wasteland followers and they're getting dealt with. Well, you know, we have a secondary choice for these amulets. We don't have to throw them onto our followers immediately. We can go ahead and just leave them on the field, throw out Alexiel, heal some damage back that we probably gained over the course of the game. And of course, on the Evo, we can deal that damage back to the enemy leader. But these are the cards that, you know, of course, outside of the staple for Judgment Cannon, I do think Godsworn Alexiel is something you should look into. And if there is a card that I am missing because I am not a huge Havencraft main player, trust me, I'm not owning up to be. If I am missing a card that we can really throw into Wasteland Abyss that can really be played in the late game, please let me know in the comments below. Alright, so let's talk about the tech for the deck. Alright, so looking at Salus, the Wheel of Fortune. So this card came out in set 10, but I think this card is absolutely amazing for this deck. Now, I do think that this card will only have like 1 application when being used because our opponent is definitely going to take care of this card immediately. And for those of you who don't already know what Wheel of Fortune does, so we can spend 2 to get this 2/2 out. If we spend the extra 2 play points, we can search our deck for Wheel of Misfortune and put it into our EX area and then shuffle. But whenever a card is put into our EX area, we can engage this card to select enemy follow in the field and destroy it. So of course, if you have been paying attention in this video, you know we're going to be throwing a lot of amulets into our EX area, or the mounts, whichever you want to call them, of course. They're going to be thrown into the EX area. Having Wheel of Fortune out is just going to let us have a free engage to take care of a follower on field. And alright soldiers, for this next card, for those of you who haven't been looking at White Fang Temple, this is a very amazing card to be putting into this deck, just because if you don't manage to hit Sugar Kiss on any of those turns, just because you have a hard time searching, this is an amazing card to be thrown into your deck, just because in those 3 extra turns that you're going to be having, you have the +1 at the end for your health, and then whenever you get to that main phase, you're able to go ahead and bury this, and you're able to actually get Sugar Kiss Assassin and put it into play. Alrighty, next up we have Pure Shot Angel. So I was not a serious believer in this card to begin with, honestly, but this is just a good card in response to Vortex Dragon. And if you have a really hard, like turn 5, 6-ish, you know, with Evo points, of course, you know, this is really good to take care of like 3 followers on the field. So not only do you get to spend this, take care of a follower that has 3 defense, evolve it, take care of another follower that has 3 defense, or, you know, take care of 1 singular follower with like 6 defense. And then you have the 6/6 that you can either leave reserved or you can swing it into the 3rd follower for some good damage. All right, and then lastly, we have Zelgenia the World. So this is just a staple, honestly, but it's not a staple for this deck if you're running off a budget, which I understand sometimes because this, Banish 10 ability really is going to be a little hefty on, somebody's pockets if you're not really super into Shadowverse Evolve, of course. But of course, getting more into card mechanics here, just having the hard removal, and then of course you're on that 10 defense or less, being able to heal 5 to potentially put you back in the game is just a good tech card for the deck. Alright, so getting into the grade of the deck. So, of course, before we get into that, we're going to look at an example build that is straight from Shadowverse Evolve, and a nice build that I have put together personally for myself. Alright, so getting into this example deck build for Shadowverse Evolve that's provided from Cygames. So I think that this is actually a pretty decent build if you want to go ahead and get it started. It comes with the basic stuff. You got the Meowskers, and then, the Meowsker Surprise, those cards that are able to look for those followers. Pretty nice little combination, of course, but it's not the direction I really want to go for the deck, because I really want to go towards more of a late game, because I think most of those decks that do get to that mid game, we do need to take care of those bigger followers. So if you are playing for more of the early game, I think this is more of a better example build for it. Alright, soldiers, so here's my current updated list for the deck that I feel like it will work, and of course you can play around with the ratios personally for yourself if you don't really like some of the cards that you see. But I do want to highlight some, certain interactions that are going to be happening in this deck. Alright, so the first interaction I really wanted to talk about was the Alice Golden Afternoon. So this card is perfect for this deck. So not only do you get to throw this card into the EX area from Sugar Kiss, we get to recover those 2 play points back that we're going to throw into Alice Golden Afternoon to go ahead and draw a card, get some good board state while removing an enemy follower off our opponent's field. And something I really didn't pay attention to, of course, in the earlier video was that Wifang Temple can actually get the Eagle. So the Eagle is actually a Faith Follower that's 4 or less. So being able to play this for free and then spending those extra 6 play points, which will be, pretty easy since we're able to play this card for free, will be pretty vital in those mid-game turns. Alright, so lastly, I wanted to talk about a card that I kind of threw in from Vanguard, but I feel like really works in this deck. So we do have Tsuchihime, or Saga Tsuchihime, however you say it. I'm sorry, it's very early, and I'm not really pressed about her name. So being able to play this on 2, looking at the top 2 cards of your deck is just going to be very important, just because info is just important in these games. So looking at the top 2 and getting any of the top 2 cards that you might want on the top of your deck, and the trash cards that you might not want to the bottom, is just very important. And then on top of that, with this on drive effect, by dealing 2 damage to a follower, of course in the early game there aren't going to be that many followers that are like 2 3s or 3 2s, sometimes it might really work out, but we really want this follower to turn into a 3/3, so our opponent has to answer it. But yeah, soldiers, I will put the deck code in the description below so you can check that out for yourselves. Alright, so getting back into the grade of the deck. Alright, so everything we've learned about the deck so far is that in the early game we have lots of aggression to keep our opponent on our toes. We have some mid-game search, which will really help when it comes to our legendary. And even with the combo that I was talking about in my build personally for Havencraft, we have that new Alice from Seaside Memories, which will let us, add another card to our hand, which is amazing for draw, of course. And then we have late game cards that can have some removal and some burn damage too. Alright, so if I were to give the deck a grade, I would give it a solid A-. So I think this deck is very fun. It has lots of tools to keep you alive. And there's some pretty nice tech cards that can really close out the game. So like, even though in our cons we did say that there aren't any late game finishers, Zelgenia of the World is always something that you can look towards into like closing out games. Now that is very hard because you got to spend the 10 and everything, and you have to, have the money sink for the worlds if you don't already have them. So I really don't want to recommend that change because it's not really open to new players. And alrighty, soldiers, that is it for the Havencraft breakdown. Now look forward to the Dragoncraft Resplendent Phoenix deck, which I will be talking about in the next video. And that'll be the last one for set 11. We will start going over how we're going to break down the set 11 or set 12 and set 13 decks, which I'm gonna kind of ask you guys in the next Dragoncraft video. I'll probably put up a poll before then if you guys want to either put both like sets in one video, like set 12 and 13 for Rune, for example, or like set 12 and 13 for Sword in like one big video, or you want to separate them by, the sets and stuff like that, so you can have a nice little, separation for that. But alright, soldiers, that is enough rambling out of me. Make sure you are safe in whatever you do tonight, and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah. TRINN. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do.